Welcome to Coffee with Joe for Thursday, December 9th, 2010. Actual monetary issues have been in the news in the last week or so. In the popular news, we had an interview with Ben Bernanke on 60 Minutes on Sunday night in which he talked about quantitative easing.
Right, she did.
And defended his quantitative easing, and people are interested in this level on what the Fed is doing. And then, of course, in this morning's newspaper, right here in the Times-Argus, Joe, Larry Summers. This is about the tax deal that's being considered down in the halls of Congress right now. Larry Summers told reporters that if the measure isn't passed soon, it will, quote, materially increase the risk the economy would stall out and we would have a double-dip recession. People go about their business expecting the money system to work. Now it's dysfunctioning enough that it's getting attention in the popular press. Jon Stewart is blogging about Bernanke. The question of, is he printing money? I mean, that was one of the things he wanted to clear up on Sunday night.
Oh, yeah, right. That's right. I remember that now. Yeah.
This myth that we're printing money. And then he says it hasn't increased the currency supply. Okay, so that's interesting. So he could have used that as a teaching moment. Jon Stewart calls him out on creating money out of thin air to buy the $600 billion in Treasury debt that they're going to be buying. That's money created out of thin air by the Fed, keystroke. And Bernanke admitted it as much in an interview on 60 Minutes a year before that, right? That Jon Stewart also references. He calls it money printing there. But a bit of a digression into whether it's currency or not, right?
Yeah. Well, first of all, to Jon Stewart's credit, he's got research, but he still doesn't really get it. He still doesn't really get it. But to tell you the truth, he's working at it harder than almost anybody. Scott Pelley is
that's the interviewer on 60 Minutes.
For Bernanke. He's the example, like we've heard a lot about regulatory capture. What we have here is media capture, Pete. We have Scott Pelley. He keeps talking about the fact that, Fed chairman don't give interviews, and yet I've got my second interview here with Bernanke,
Joe, what is your view? Is Bernanke printing money with quantitative easing, buying the $600 billion in treasuries?
Yeah, he is. He is, at least for a time. What Bernanke didn't explain is what's the significance of printing currency or not printing currency. What's the significance of the money supply increases? Because he talked about money supply increases. He says we didn't increase the money supply in any significant way. So then you say to yourself, well, as a matter of monetary policy, Mr. Chairman, do we want to be increasing the money supply right now or not? And if you're taking $600 billion of monetary power and not increasing the money supply significantly, what are you doing with it? Why do it then? And now it's the only media, it's like the exclusive interview, you want to get more of these? Don't ask us the follow-up questions. Don't ask us what does that mean, Mr. Chairman?
So what Joe, does that what are the questions that weren't asked of Bernanke?
Well, Pete, there's all kinds of relationship questions because Bernanke actually started out his interview talking about the problem of the ingrained unemployment. He says we've got a large part of the unemployed right now have been unemployed for a long time, and there's no prospect for them going back to work. So therefore, we need to take monetary policy action, okay? So you say to yourself, okay, what is the monetary policy action? This gets back to public monetary policy, Pete. What's the monetary policy action that you're taking? And how is it going to have an effect on unemployment, on the unemployment figures or employment? And how long is it going to take approximately? Okay? And what are the measures that we should look for to see about the success of the monetary policy that you've chosen to put in place? And these are the kind of questions that the chairman ought to be answerable to with regard to unemployment. Okay? And then with regard to inflation, he says, well, we're targeting inflation at 2%, not to be higher than 2%. But he says, we're also experiencing deflation. So we're doing this to counter the deflationary effects of the on the economy. Okay, how are deflationary effects on the economy seen? Where are they? Deflation of what? Of the consumer price index?
No.
Of a basket of goods?
Real estate.
Of real estate, of a bunch of assets, Pete, let's call it, of a bunch of assets?
But not the stock market.
Of stocks? Of what? So it's very much hyperbole and rhetoric that's coming out of Bernanke, and a totally, ignorant. I have to say that, Pete. Okay, it's the ignorance, apparent ignorance on the part of the interviewer to try to get to anything except, here came Mr. Bernanke. Thanks a lot for coming in, Mr. Bernanke. Thanks a lot for telling us what you want to tell us, and there you go. And it's the same thing in the Congress, Pete. Okay. Now, by the way, Ron Paul is apparently going to become chair of one of the committees that the Fed reports to. It will be really interesting to see, one of the leading critics of the Fed have the opportunity to bring him in and set the agenda for some of those types of meetings, Pete. But again, onto the deflation part, Pete. What causes deflation? What's the cause and what's the effect? That's the whole thing, Pete. And really, the cause, Pete, has to do with the money supply. There's no other cause. I don't know if I'm a monetarist the way people define monetarists in the economics textbooks, but I do happen to agree with Milton Friedman when he said, inflation is always a monetary phenomena, as is deflation. And when you take a look at what happened in the Great Depression, and supposedly Bernanke is an expert on the Great Depression, you can see that it was, the measure was the contraction of the money supply. There's a contraction of the money supply and nobody's working. So what do we need to do? We need to increase the money supply. Which part of the money supply do we need to increase? We need to increase the one that gets paid into wages, because the thing that matters most to people is their ability to pay their bills. So we need wages in order to have employment so that we can have people paying their bills, and that's the generative aspect of money in the national economy. And we don't have that. And largely we don't have it, Pete, because Bernanke's tools are really aimed not at the unemployed. Okay, he might be aiming at a statistic, but they're not aimed at helping the unemployed. They're aimed at helping the bankers. And they do a decent job of helping the bankers, Pete. Bank stocks, the stock market might go down, but bank stocks will go up, will continue to go up. So there's lots of questions, Pete. There's lots of questions that really should be asked. And, Scott Pelley is not, in my opinion, no longer capable. He has been captured by the mystique of the power.
So if you were a reporter at the Larry Summers presser this morning, what would you have asked Larry Summers? He's threatening that if we don't pass this tax compromise, we might go into a double-dip recession.
The obvious question to me is, how so? What is the connection between continuing the tax breaks and the recession, the second dip in the recession? What's the connection? We keep hearing that the deficit's going to cause the recession. Exactly. The debt's going to cause the recession. Now it's if you don't continue the tax breaks, it's going to cause the recession. But the questions are, well, what's the connection? How does that work? Is there a mechanic to it, or is it psychological? It's strictly confidence building, And this is all about psychology and confidence in order to try to get people to be thinking that things are okay and that things are working according to the plan. Now, I thought I just saw a headline come across that said that the House turned down those tax increases. So I wouldn't be surprised to see the stock market crash this afternoon, Pete, if Summers is right. What do you think?
I think people are pretty complacent about the stock market right now, Joe. I think
I know it's not.
They've heard the doomsdayers telling them it's going to crash for the last 2 years, and it just keeps going up. I think they see no reason to believe the doomsdayers now. Everybody agrees we put off making the hard decision around if we pass this tax compromise.
Yeah.
Where is
right.
the deficit commission's recommendations. It was only 2 weeks ago, Joe, you and I were sitting here talking about Obama's deficit commission report.
Right.
The warnings that they're issuing are very dire around the deficit. Which one is it, guys? Which one?
Yeah, the grandchildren aren't really too important this week, Pete. Until we deal with the money supply, Pete. Until we deal with the debt money system and the money supply, and have that part of the monetary policy discussion, we are definitely headed for the second part of the rest of the continuation of the recession.
If the stock market crashes this afternoon, maybe we'll have to repost, and I'll be slapping you on the back for that one.
Okay, Pete.
See you, Joe.
Ciao.